Welcome, everybody. Sokuzan asked that I give a talk tonight. If you've been here the past few times that I've been asked to talk, it's been on addiction awareness meditation. And I don't think there's anybody new here to that. So you're welcome to ask questions, but I won't go too much into catching us up wherever we might be. Um, but this particular time, Sokuzan was looking at and asking about how we might look at that beyond just the traditional idea of addiction with substances. And I might say bring it into some more Buddhist ideas. So looking at how we might be fixated on thoughts or other things like that. So I asked the question, and this is basically what I want to try to talk out of is how can we be addicted to something like thoughts, or what is that addiction that looks like something like cigarettes? Like just being really familiar. Has anyone not been addicted to cigarettes? Really?
Smoked, but I wasn't ever addicted.
I just assumed you
No
had a
family
decade.
whatsoever smokes in
Oh.
the vicinity.
Well, that example is less relevant than I was expecting. But when I was thinking of cigarettes, it's more than any other addiction I've had. It's just so constant. It's like all day long from the moment you wake up, from the moment you go to bed, like your whole day's that's just there. Whatever you're doing is that plus the cigarette.
So I had that intensely. That's intense addiction to cigarettes. Very hard.
Is that how you describe it similarly?
Yes, just can't get away from it. It's very, very, very difficult.
And I worked at a job, even though, not to go into this too much, where I was working on cars. And so even when they made it illegal, you could still just smoke all day long at work because you're in a shop. So um, I was curious, how do we do that with the thought process, or how does that show up maybe more fundamentally? So I think we can look at, and this is more or less Sokuzan's answer when I asked him that, but we're addicted to right and wrong and figuring things out. And I can see that where if I don't know something, like something shows up, I don't know what it is, I immediately either am already covering it up or I'm looking at how to cover that up. I trust we all do that. And there's a pain when that's not satisfied. And that feels very similar to something like a cigarette or a drink or a substance. It doesn't feel to me all that different. And I was talking recently with a friend of mine around like what addiction is and just seeing how subjective that is. And I think a pretty common description of it would be you or someone else identifies that it's interfering. What would if you could just off the cuff, the professional diagnosis be for addiction?
There's 10 criteria but primarily, yeah, it's interfering with life, interfering with goals and work, relationships. And then there is biological health is impacted. So, but yeah, 10 criteria. I think 7 or more is addiction. And then there's 2 other categories for lesser
According to what?
American Psychiatric Association.
How would you know that?
There's an Addictive Medicine Association too. ASAM.
How do you know that?
How do I know that? Because I am a certified addiction counselor with a social work degree.
Thank you.
Advanced addiction. Don't forget, in Michigan, it's a CAADC.
ACDC. Is there anything in that criteria that is other based, like any of those, does the individual have to recognize all of those things, or can someone else have an issue and that's one of the criteria? Like someone else can say that you have 7 of those and you're an addict. Is it like
Well,
that?
a therapist or a doctor, anybody who's qualified to render a diagnosis. But none of the criteria are where your family's having a problem with you. You're noticing something. It's not to say that there might be some familiarity with your story, even though you wouldn't admit it. The therapist would say, yep, I'll check that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I was curious around because of the subjectivity, like how much of that was like objectified, but I think we're maybe on a tangent here. So addiction awareness meditation for the few of you that joined a little bit later after I said that, and looking at how addiction can show up in our thoughts. And is that maybe the same thing as grasping in Buddhism? Is that pointing at a similar area? So I'm kind of imagining those lists of things that Ondo just said and wondering if we could check off 7 of those boxes with our thoughts or behaviors. Like if we could identify when being right has become a problem for my well-being or something like that. So when, how would you describe when a thought has become addictive by kind of like that idea that Ondo had?
When you're buying, I would say when I believe it. And then I act on it. No,
So when we believe it and we act on it, and I feel like I've heard Sokuzan say, um, it's when we're not aware of it. Like that's when something really has its hooks in us. And that's helpful to consider because it brings it right back to not fixing anything. When I look at it the way I recall Sokuzan bringing that up. So maybe I could ask you about that. Can you think of a time where you believed your thoughts and acted on it, where you were and weren't aware of it, and if there was a difference with those?
when you're buying. For me, it seems that I'm well aware of the thoughts, but they keep coming anyway, and I keep buying into them to the point where it often affects what I would call my behavior. Where I'll withdraw. And I just know I'm right. Or I may not. It's too embarrassing to admit that perhaps my thinking is skewed.
Thank you. So if like a substance abuse would be defined by like how it affects our lives, I'm curious, looking at samsara as the addiction here, like that we're addicted to suffering in a way. Maybe we could look at samsara that way. We're addicted to suffering. So where the substance abuse is a little easier to see because you have very clear things that are or aren't being met anymore. Like you're not going to work on time. You're not fulfilling your familial duties or something like that. With the spiritual path, I don't know that you can look at it that way. That it would necessarily be wrong for those kind of things to fall short. But how could we look at that? Is the problem like where we're causing ourselves suffering, where we're hooked on the circularity, even though we're not aware of it? Or like traditionally it said, calling what's pleasurable painful, calling what's painful pleasurable. Those are traditional ways we delude ourselves. And I can see that's a similarity with all those kinds of addictions. We're hooked on something, we're deluded by it. We think something that is painful is pleasurable. We're just calling black white. Um, so why is that a problem on the spiritual path? Or like what's the image coming up is like hellfire and brimstone. Like what's the issue if you do that unchecked or don't look at it? I think we'd have to speculate a little bit and look at something like reincarnation or um I know Sokuzan's frequently said if we lived forever or a really, really long time, we would probably just stop fighting with everything. But because we don't, um, there needs to be a spiritual path. I don't know, needs to be, but that's a way of working with that dilemma that we don't live forever and we're having trouble while we're here. And it seems that there's maybe something going on that we've done this before or we keep doing it. So if it really is just about the awareness, what does that do? If it's not about fixing, like with the traditional substance addiction, it's very clear you're doing this thing you should stop doing. And you can succeed or not succeed at that, but you're very clear about what you're doing. But like Unyo's describing perfectly, I think I can just hear my shoulder Sokuzan saying that's awareness. Like you're describing all of that, and it's like that's it. We just want it to go away. I've been waking up for like 3 months. Just the worst I've ever felt. It goes away in like 5 minutes, but it's like every single day. It's irritating to just feel bad all the time. But you're still here. I'm still here. Yeah.
Yvonne, I have a question. Curious about the statement you made a few minutes ago. With it, if I'm correct, with substance abuse, it's easier to perhaps see how it's impacting a life. And then you use the phrase something about where pain becomes pleasure, pleasure becomes pain. So you've spoken personally about substance abuse in your own life. Can you describe a time when the pain became, or when the pleasure then moved into pain and then pain into pleasure? And how is the spiritual path, I want to say, helping you? Bowing.
To give an example of when something pleasurable is painful, I was thinking of those kind of coming up together, like to start wanting or doing something that's objectively like damaging you, like drinking a lot, like that's a poison, like it's hurting your voice, like it's damaging stuff actively while you do it. So that could be seen as something that's painful, like it's actually hurting you. And that seems to come up at the same time as um, like downplaying or no longer being satisfied with like comforts at home, like your parents wanting you to be at home and sober and being hugged by them or something like that. I don't know if that's communicating what I'm trying to communicate, but something that's actually nice, like people being around you and kind, we start to turn away from that. And that to me seems like an example of something that's pleasurable and we're viewing it as painful, and we're going to something that's painful and viewing that as pleasurable. And I don't remember your other part.
But so on that line of what's behind all of that then? Of course, the second noble truth comes up, wanting things to be different than they are. So are you saying that it like the example you just used with your family hugging and just enjoying the time with them, but then you leave that to seek some other, what is perceived as a pain, namely some substance abuse, some substance that becomes abusive? what is it about that substance that is so magnetic?
I think it's very obviously there's a biological situation going on. There's some substances that just hook you chemically. And that's not universal too. There's some, as I'm sure you can run into or have even heard, like some person can do this one thing and it either just doesn't do anything to them biologically for some reason, or they just don't like it. It's like, why would anyone want to do that every day? It's like, well, that's not how everyone who does that feels. But maybe you weren't asking this exactly, but what part of it seems to be you get to be different. Like you get to be this person that has this special experiences that's different than everybody else. And you need to ask me about why I can do this and it's actually good. It's like this whole story that it justifies. And then you get to talk to other people and it just creates this duality out of delusion. Because if you just looked at it, it's like you're killing yourself, obviously. But no, 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 no. Everyone in my family drinks. We're Russian. We do this and blah, 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 blah. So there's like all this stuff that, and I'm kind of really leaning on that to talk about something there. It's probably not that hyperbolic. Did that get at what you were?
In your mind, so you're saying that we get to feel special.
Yeah, even if we feel like crap, you get to be the one who feels like crap, especially if that's like other than how other people are feeling. Maybe not always the case, but there's something like that in sociology where you get a group of people, and it's just another concept for stuff we're already looking at, where so you get a bunch of women together, let's say that, like you and all of the women in the Sangha get together, and none of the men are there. Just that grouping of people will create a new other. Like there'll be so like a different colored woman walks in, like she's now you're all women, but she's still other than you because there's a new other. I don't know if I'm losing you. I'm losing myself a little bit.
And your point is,
I forgot your question to.
it's the specialness of what's behind wanting to be special.
That's a really good question. How does that one look to you?
In your mind, what showed up for me was there's a chapter in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism where Rinpoche talks about someone who's had, let's say, some kind of is it Satori or whatever it's called, and they tell all their friends, and oh, it was just great, and now I see life differently, or whatever, how he elaborated in the book. But what happens usually he goes on to say is that fades. And I was just imagining telling all my friends that, oh, I had this great experience and I'm on top of the world, and now it fades and I'm grasping, trying to get that back because I don't feel like that anymore. Now I'm back in the dumps. And so it seems to me it has something to do with Sogazan's talk recently about losing face. It's humiliating, it's embarrassing, because now I can no longer continue in that perhaps elevated way. And I'm not sure where that particularly leads, but is it that we're addicted to some kind of special personhood?
I appreciate that you went into it with what you just said, because it, I think, can show up as the other way too. It's not just about feeling special. You could get just as much sustenance for the self-centeredness by wanting to keep your face off, like wanting to lose, like already having lost face, not wanting to ever put it back on, like out of fear, or just trying to maintain that or return to it. So then that makes me ask the question, if it's not necessarily about feeling special or being special, is there something that both the special and maybe the shameful both are the same or working with the same area. So I look at the skandhas. I think that's a helpful area. And how Sokuzan talks about the illusion of a self being like the skandhas holding hands, and that in realization, I don't know if you've said it exactly like this, but that those might not hold hands, or that seem to be unreal. So I think it has something to do. I think I'm still looking at your question here, Unyo. Um, with by kicking that story up or whatever that is that you can relate to, and being able to like check in with that in your mind stream, something like that, holding the hands with the skandhas, you're using the form to like hold hands with concept, like you're referencing the story. So it keeps coming back to the story for me when you're looking at that. Something about that self chatter gets nourished, and like looking at the three natures, or rather the eight consciousnesses, where seventh can be seen as always reflecting. I think of that like it creates this area in the mind stream that reflects a imputed image of yourself back to yourself, like an imaginary mirror that's not there all the time, but you're getting like this reference to that. So it seems to nurture that dynamic that it says in the 30 verses that that's not happening in an arhat.
What's an arha?
I believe that is the same thing as an arhan. And an arhant. There's that too.
Is that something we aspire to? We aspiring to being an arha? Hunt?
Sounds good to me. That sounds like a nice life. No more seventh consciousness. Hondo.
Wonderful. I don't know if you want to go back to, the addiction to a substance. There is 11 criteria, and it kind of a general statement is involves patterns of symptoms caused by using a substance, or what you're proposing, using thoughts, believing thoughts, that an individual continues taking despite its negative effects.
And the negative effects here being samsara. That's how I was trying to link it. Like we're hooked on samsara. So that's the negative effect.
And the criteria, though, are kind of interesting too. Used in larger amounts and longer than intended.
2 billion lifetimes.
Repeated attempts to control or quit use. Much time spent using. Physical or psychological problems related to use. Activities given up to use.
Yeah.
Um,
Being late for your vacation because you're arguing in the kitchen for an hour.
and then tolerance and withdrawal.
That's a good area too. Like you actually feel bad when you're not doing it. And that's where I think the blame comes in, because it looks like that person caused it, but really you're just not getting your fix of being right or figuring it out. But you were saying, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that many of those, I think, can pretty easily show up as, showing us how addicted, but Buddhism uses fixated, but addicted we are to our thoughts and all the symptoms that are very similar to a substance use diagnosis. So I guess my question, one of my questions could be how, to tolerance and withdrawal, two key addiction criteria. How do we experience those in being fixated on thoughts or thought patterns.
I think the tolerance shows up in the cultural like support for it. It's like everyone is just takes it for granted that we just do that. Like our school system's set up to bring up that quality in people, the memorization, I can't even, looks like my mind doesn't want to look at school right now. Um, so that seems to be a kind of tolerance, like in the sense that like we're numb to it or it's not fully getting to us because it's taken for granted. And then what was the other half of that?
Withdrawal.
Withdrawal. I think that's like the fighting or the fear or the anger that comes up of when that falls apart over and over again. Like our conclusions don't line up to what's happening. We're irritated. That seems to be like little mini withdrawals all the time. And I don't know that we're ever off of them long enough to experience the full withdrawal. Maybe that's a solitary retreat or just the meditation practice in general. We're slowly letting in that withdrawal. You could say it's what it feels like. Looking at it as voluntary suffering, we're taking some time to not hit that thought cigarette, and it feels bad. But maybe it's supportive to look at it that way. It's supportive for me to look at it that way because it helps me to not, or to at least have a little bit of an understanding that the negativity I'm feeling right now isn't like about what's happening right now. Like if I'm coming off of this however many year thought addiction and I'm just sitting down, probably going to feel bad. So um, it's a helpful area to look at. So I appreciate you bringing that up. You know,
You're doubling. I'm thinking about that in terms of that one criteria of tolerance, withdrawal. A lot of us drink coffee and have to go through withdrawal when we stop. It's pretty temporary. Sokuzan's shaking his head.
No withdrawal.
I understand that to be true. Like you don't have,
And-
you've
I
taken
never
coffee.
stopped drinking it.
This is a two-part question. The two parts aren't necessarily related, but
That's just two questions then.
okay.
The English major.
Every question has a front and a back. Aren't they all two-part questions? Please go on. I'm sorry.
Is that sort of addiction? I mean, I can see where we are suffering, we want something to be different. In other words, we want to be more awake. We want to feel like ourselves in quotes. However we feel when we drink coffee or whatever, tea or something that's caffeine related. Is there a thought preceding that we have a maybe addictive thought that precedes our need to continue a particular addiction, even though it doesn't have any of the other 10 criteria? Bowing.
I don't know if this is what you're wanting to hear, but I'm looking at, well, maybe it's not a thought, like a rut, like the thing that precedes it is maybe the fact that we already do that. And maybe not much more than that. It's just this continual thing that we do. But could you help me get closer to what you're asking when you're asking about that? Like with the thought in particular?
Yeah, you Dao bowing. It has more to do with the original question that I wanted to ask, and that has to do with is there, I mean, people are suffering and they find a substance that relieves that suffering. They want it to be different. They have anxiety, they have depression, they have whatever feelings that they can't seem to manage or live with or look at. So is the original addiction about that thinking or thought? I'm not even sure how to word it, but can you help me with that?
I like the way you said it. Like to feel normal or to feel like me, like addicted to feeling like me. And again, that just it goes right back to that structure I was pointing at earlier with the 30 verses where you have this reference in the seventh consciousness, the concept, and the hand holding. So it seems to be just another example of that reference point, that the back and forth chatter. So it seems like if we can keep this up right here, we can project a world out here that's doing the same thing where um, that's not actually happening, but everyone's doing it. I feel like I lost what you were asking about though.
I think I was wondering if we could back up from a more physical, biological addiction into the prior state that they might say caused it or initiated it. And I wonder if we can do that with our thoughts as well, like what is there a thought, are there thoughts behind this thought that is making me want to act in a particular way?
It seems like you could, but what you're asking about would only be valuable if stuff was linear and time was back there. But if it's a circle, it's like it doesn't matter. Like you're pointing to nothing if you go back. It's just, of course, you'll find something, but there's no, so what? Um, and I don't know that you can really go back that far because have you ever just tried to not eat and drink? Like, because that isn't that the most fundamental addiction? Like that you're just hardwired to eat and drink whether you or breathe. Like, isn't it like if you can't like drown on purpose or something like that? Um, or you're gonna take a gasp of air, like you can't just hold your breath until you die, or maybe you can, but like it just doesn't seem like you have a choice to be alive at least a little bit. Like you're gonna eat just enough or drink just enough, or I guess there are other ways to discontinue the body. But isn't that some ascetic practices are looking at that area where you really slow some of those or control a lot of those to see what is more at the root? And if I understand, just traditionally, the Buddha looked at all of that thoroughly. He was a master at those ascetic practices. Like he could go through the jhana states at will. Um, and he came back and said, you don't need to do that. So I think there's a lot of material out there for what you're asking about, but I don't know that, and perhaps it's fun and supportive for your practice, so I wouldn't disregard that. But I don't know how important it is to know that for anything like soteriologically. We just used that word yesterday.
Thank you, that I think it helped to point at the circularity of that process.
Yeah, okay.
Bowing, I'm curious when you were talking about creating stories in the way that you hear people talk about, I'm drinking to forget or forget those memories. Is there a story that is forgotten with addiction?
I think and this is really subjective, but I think it's a way of transferring that relationship with the fourth skandha to like the skandha of feeling. You're just really heightening up a sensation, being drunk, and you can relate to that. And it seems to replace the thought process, but it's like a kind of fixation. You're just putting that reference on something else in the mind stream, the feeling of the body or the lack thereof.
Milk bowing. So with the thought process, if we're using a creative endeavor or construction or some activity to cover up some kind of memory, would you say that's also creating feelings?
Probably, but like when you said that, I just hear Sokuzan saying it's not about stopping it, it's just about being aware. So, in none of these situations are we at least looking at it as a spiritual path, needing to correct any of it. So maybe, while it's a similar dynamic, like you're still hooking up that relationship, you might find a better way to do that in your life. Like instead of drinking, you paint or something like that. I think that's appropriate. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but that's what I was um, thinking of when you said that.
Yokoban, yes. And then the other area I was looking at is like a runner or somebody who's so involved in their physical activity to the point where they might be hurting themselves. Is that also, I guess it looks like it to me, but I'm gonna ask anyway, is that also covering up or can be used in a way that um it it helps us, it would help someone ignore or turn away from some kind of from the skandhas. I'll just leave it general like that. Wow.
I think so. And what is it? You get a runner's high. Like there's even a name for that. And what's a runner's high is endorphins. And endorphins is endogenous morphine. That's why you have opiate receptors. That's why heroin works on you. It's because we can run, and that's where what biologically the distance runner, the reason that we're the top dog here compared to the other animals is because we can just run and run and run. And it seems like because of that literal drug route that our brain has to do that. So yeah, I think that's the first way that we did it. And we just found other ways to use chemicals to not have to burn so many calories to feel good. Thank you. James, I think you had your hand up quite a bit ago.
Oh, James Fallon. So I was just thinking about all pervasive suffering and oppression. So is addiction like wanting to rely on a substance, wanting to shift the actual shift the attention away from the natural suffering within yourself to something else? You know, like not wanting to be free, actually free. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it.
All right. Or I was thinking about evolution and things with thoughts and pain and things like pulse. And I was thinking, did those all evolve from this? Are those all essentially the same thing evolutionary wise or biologically? Are they all just forms of physical pain?
I'm not too sure. And even within like the Buddhist tradition, to look at the three pains, the pain of pain, like ow, like you get hit, your nerve endings, that hurts. The pain of alternation, um, the fact that things don't last. The traditional story is like being at a wedding and the bridge that everyone's on collapses, and then everything goes from being completely pleasurable to the complete opposite experience of pain. And then you're asking about that pain of conditioned existence, but I've been curious about that. Like, is the pain no matter what? Are there just three different ways of pointing at causes of that pain? Is it all like we're just miserable no matter what? But yeah, I'm not too sure about the other stuff. I'm sure you can
There's
find out a lot
things
of stuff about that, like researching Google.
there's things with the jhanas where they bring you happiness, but I think it says they're still oppressive because you have to actually maintain them to you actually have to maintain them to get that happiness. You So I don't know if does that mean that if you have to maintain a meditation or even just sitting on a cushion, isn't that doesn't that make all meditation have a little bit of pain?
I missed that second to last word. Your internet just jerked.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
It was that the jhanas are painful because you have to maintain them, even though they give you happiness.
Mm.
And isn't meditation painful in the same way because you have to sit and you have to be aware for them?
I think so. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to what you said, but I want to go to Jishin here before we run out of too much more time. But thank you, James. Jishin, please.
Bowing. If substance abuse is self-sabotaging, I'm wondering how are we sabotaging ourselves when we are believing our thoughts? Bowing.
Well, we're probably believing that we have to do something that we don't need to. So just like any kind of involvement is like if we look at life as suffering, if we're moving throughout this, it is an expression of suffering in a sense. Um, Looking at it like having a thought, I need to do this or this needs to change, believing that and then acting on it, like Unio was saying, just takes you away from not doing too much. But if it's about the awareness, does that change the way we look at that situation? So instead of believing versus disbelieving, is it being aware versus not being aware of the situation? I don't know why I'm even putting a versus in there. No one's asking me to posit two different things and struggle. I think I just confessed how I give myself a hard time, just needlessly creating opposition. So that's how.
Thank you, Jishin Bowing. I'm also wondering what is that self that we are sabotaging? Bowing.
I don't know to answer it the way you asked it, but it just seems like we're giving ourselves a harder time than is already happening to us. Like it's gonna be hard no matter what, and we just make it a little harder because we don't want to just see that this is difficult, so we project that it could maybe not be difficult. So we create just like a double difficult instead of just basic difficulty. Um, so maybe simplicity is this is not what you're asking, but if we can simplify things, it's probably not too bad. But I spun off from what you were asking, I think.
Jishin Bowing, thank you. Well, I'm just looking at those connections between addiction to substances and addiction to negative thinking, brought to me that whole idea of that there is some kind of self-sabotaging. So I was trying to engage that conversation into that direction for a little bit. Thank you, Bowing.
And as you're saying that, just because we're in the monastery right now, it's like the question keeps for me coming back to, um, yeah, how is it the addiction to two-ness, not the addiction to belief or disbelief, but how is it the addiction to this and that? Like trying to come back down to that basic delusion. But anyway, no one's asked me that. Milka.
Yoka bowing, that's kind of where I was just going is what is the structure that we need to look at in terms of something that looks like it's covering up what we need to see.
Can you ask that one more time?
Milka bowing, what is the structure or the form of our that we construct? What is it that we construct into a form, and how we do that? What is it there that we need to look at in terms of covering up what we need to see?
As far as like what is it or the structure, um, I don't really know how to get exactly at what I'm understanding you to ask, but I'll try to say something. Um, but I'm thinking of the dream example. It's like at night, you know that there's a dream that you had. You're not even sure what you means in that, but you kind of, I don't know if you do this, but when we were sharing dreams around the table, it always felt like I had to lie a little bit. It's like it wasn't exactly like this, but I want to share it, so I need to fabricate this story to even talk about it. And I think we're doing that to ourselves. But we're not as aware of it here. It's easier to see that in a dream because it's maybe so much contrast to what's happening here that seems so stable. But in a dream, have you had a dream where there's not really a strong like self presence? There's not really even like a body in your memory, it's just more scenery and stuff like that.
Yes.
Um, so it feels like to look at this like a dream, it's like it's just a dream. You're not talking about a dream or the things being dreamt, but it lends itself to that duality. It looks like there's a this and that. It looks like because there's hands here and they're not your hands over here, it looks like there's like a direction and like this whole thing's based on me over here. Um, so I don't know that that goes away, but I think we can look at how much we take that for granted. And I think the dream's a great example to look at that, where that whole thing can shift around a lot, where there's no content, it's just a form or any combination of stuff seems to really get crazy there sometimes. But this situation just seems to really lend itself to there's a body here and there's stuff out here.
Kavaling, in terms of addiction, is what is it about the addiction that keeps us from seeing that dualism?
I think it's spinning. Like there's something like I don't know if it's actually spinning or pretty damn close to being able to talk about it that way, but like some kind of that seventh consciousness, like that mirror quality can also look like a tornado that's coming around you and creating a cocoon. Like there's actually like this cocoon of linked together thoughts and stories that we have that keep us from actually seeing what's in front of us. Um, so we're addicted to things that support that spinning because that's what creates the illusion of the ability of something to move through space because we're ignoring stuff. Like the image I think about is like if you put a cardboard tube on your eye and you went to the store and someone came up to you, it'd scare the crap out of you and you would think this person just appeared. But it's just because you're ignoring the whole situation, you're limiting what you're seeing and it creates the illusion of stuff showing up. That's not actually happening, or at least that's what I'm understanding the teachings to talk about. Anything further before we close and have evening service? Udal.
I'm wondering if you could say anything about addiction and choicelessness.
Yeah, that's a great one, especially like in the 12-step programs like that's the first step in the room is like admitting that they say powerless, maybe a negative way of looking at that or maybe not that different. Like would you say powerless and choiceless are similar? I think it's accenting the agency in the one, but I don't want to answer it for you.
I would agree. Thank you.
Yeah, I was contemplating how alcohol is called spirits and just like taking that a little literally because I don't know what your history is with anything like that, but um, it can seem like there's something else like running the show while that thing's in you, like a spirit or something. Um, so I think with like the substance abuse look, you look at just not doing that first thing to start that whole chain and you can maintain that for a while. But that's the sticky or the sad part is like I don't think you can really get, and I think this is what the Buddhist teachings would say with impermanence. You can't actually lock down that first thing and just never do it again. You can maybe last a whole life, but that tendency is not gone anywhere. Um, so in that sense, it seems choiceless. Like you can delay it a little bit, but like fundamentally, you're not really interrupting that circularity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think we can close. Thank you. We'll dedicate the merit